Okay.
Hi, I'm Gareth Kane. Welcome to the Net Zero Business Podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Damian Tow, Director and Program Manager at the Brighton Energy Co-operative. Welcome to the podcast, Damian.
Thank you very much, Gareth. Thanks for inviting me.
So, we're going to talk a lot about community energy, but I like to start by asking my guests how they got started in this career, sort of in clean energy in general, and then how did you get into community energy?
Yeah, I think it goes back a long way. I grew up in the countryside in Sherwood Forest. My garden backed onto fields, so I used to just play in the fields. That was my sort of leisure time. Lots of dens, lots of, playing in old quarries. And actually, I think my first bit of activity in campaigning or environmental awareness was that there was the local quarry that we used to play in, which was an old brickworks, was going to be filled in as a rubbish dump. And eventually that did actually happen. But through speaking up at public meetings, being involved, actually, it's more my parents and my parents' friends who were the campaigners, but there was a sort of presence of younger people there. So it kind of gave me a sense of standing up for your rights and awareness around that. Um, that kind of took me to, I guess, the age of about, uh, 18, 19. I went to university, did French and business degree. Partly I did business because I didn't really know what else to do, and I thought it'd lead to a better job. And the French aspect was because my mum's Belgian, and I had always a sort of an interest in languages and a background. So there's a kind of a juxtaposition there with an interest in the environment and nature, but also thinking, oh, I should be sensible and get a sensible job, etc. And then I did a rally international expedition in 1990 to Zimbabwe. And, sort of 20 years old, living in the African bush for 3 months with a lot of like-minded young people, also working with local Zimbabwean venturers and, building latrines in small villages, doing environmental projects there. That sort of was a great eye-opening experience as well. But then, came to sort of age 22, doing a graduate, looking to get a graduate job, not really knowing how I might apply a business studies degree, knowledge of French, and an interest in the environment. And I remember at that stage, that was like in 1993. I think I wrote to sort of various organisations and got some nice replies. But it's pre-internet. It was very difficult when you don't know what you don't know to make any progress. So I thought, well, I'll go and do a graduate training program. So I ended up at Courtaulds doing a graduate training program, and then after about 18 months realized that the manufacturing sector was probably not where I wanted to be, particularly because it was declining in the UK. Then ended up working at cable and wireless. So I ended up in tech, in IT.
Yeah.
And then that morphed into working at BT for about 8 years, and in between setting up a dot-com startup. So sort of cut my teeth in business, in startup, organizations, raising finance, a whole lot of skills. But then I got to about, it was 37, 38. I went traveling with an ex-girlfriend and picked up a book called The Weather Makers. I don't know if you ever come across it. Um,
Sounds vaguely familiar, but
yeah,
perhaps you could
yeah,
describe it.
yeah. So it's by a guy. I forgot, it's Tim Flannery, maybe. I've forgotten exactly his name, but he was a research scientist in botany, perhaps. And one of the sort of key messages that came through from me is the animals that he was surveying, the animals, fauna and flora that he was surveying, perhaps it was in the rainforests in Papua New Guinea, were being forced further and further up the mountain. And it was a sort of symbol for me at about the same time as an inconvenient truth. And actually, yeah, I did something which was, sort of in retrospect, a very spiritual experience, which was hiking the John Muir Trail in the States, which is basically 17 days of self-supported hiking in wilderness. So I got a combination of that and watching An Inconvenient Truth on the plane on the way back. And then the following year reading The Weather Makers, I was like, I really need to, put
Mhm.
my shift my career into something I really believe in terms of my values and the environment and nature rather than it was well paid working in the tech sector, but it just didn't have any soul for me. So yeah, that kind of led to a career change.
Yeah. So, how did you respond then to this
Um,
those confluence of
Impulses.
those different influences?
Yeah, exactly. Well, the irony was it was 15 years after I'd originally thought, I'll go and, I didn't mention that I'd originally thought I'll go do a year or two in, the commercial world and learn some skills and I can and apply it to the sort of environmental good or social good. But that took 15 years. But then I ended up doing a master's at Forum for the Future, which you may have come across. I think you might have interviewed people that might have done that in the past, which was a program that doesn't exist anymore. But they took 12 people each year. Mostly were good 10 years younger than me. So they were mostly recent graduates and gave them 6 months of exposure in different types of organizations. So you do a month-long project in a whole range of different types of organisations. I volunteered at the Ecologist, the National Audit Office, Cornwall Council, um, Swiss Bank. So, massively contrasting and how they were all working on sustainability. And then there was all different academic themes through it. And, that sort of opened up a different world to me, particularly the alumni network from Forum is very powerful. Because, we've got a WhatsApp group with maybe 200 people on it still who have all are at least 10 years into their career, some 25 years into their career. And that left me, lots of connections, an academic shift, and the personal development of doing a master's. But it was 2009, and convincing employers when renewable energy, which is what I wanted to get into, was a fairly nascent. That my skill set was transferable. I'm sure you've come across that before. That it's a lot easier bet, particularly in the recession, in the Great Recession, where people weren't recruiting anyway, to recruit somebody who's got the ideal match rather than take a gamble on somebody. So after about 6 months of somewhat fruitless interviewing, I came across a chap called Will Cottrell, who I'm still working with in Brighton Energy Co-op, and he had an idea of creating a community energy organisation, and that was inspired by going to the COP in Denmark, and which wasn't a very successful one, as you recall, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But he came across there were lots of community-owned wind turbines, and he looked at the model, and it was just about the time the feed-in tariff was going to launch in the UK.
Mm.
So we helped him out with a business plan. A lady called Danny Craker, who was an accountant, joined us, and it was kind of a side project. Alongside, I ended up working for Brighton Council for a couple of years in sustainability, and also set up something called the Eco Technology Show, which was a conference and events business in Brighton. Says the name's on the tin effectively. It was all about featuring, showcasing environmental technology solutions at the time. And I don't know if you've come across the Blue Earth Summit. We were kind of,
Yeah.
yeah, in London.
Yeah. I
Um,
haven't been, but I've heard of it.
no, it's doing a very good job, and it's kind of what we would have ideally liked to have achieved, but we were 10 years early. And
Yeah.
we even saw with policy changes around the feed-in tariff, where there was a kind of a boom and bust in the solar sector, uh, and David Cameron cutting the green crap, etc. It all filters down to whether businesses are going to invest, whether people are going to continue in certain sectors, energy efficiency in particular. And it led to us closing down that business in 2016. But by then we'd done probably 3 or 4 share offers with Brighton Energy Co-op, and we'd gone from volunteers not being paid to being able to pay ourselves, and really sort of that became quite a roller coaster for about 3 years. With I think we've probably done a dozen share offers now, so effectively one a year and one bond offer, and installed at well, I'm now going on to your second question, but I don't think that really that's the sort of background of where I got to
Yeah.
now. But yeah, shall I just continue?
Yeah, yeah. You're showing the man behind the curtain that we do
Yeah, 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 yeah.
lay out some original questions. But yeah,
Yeah.
that's I was going to ask you what when you're raising money,
Mm,
what way do you raise it? I have a small investment in. I just checked which one it was. It was Bath Energy Co-op or Bath
yeah.
West England Energy Co-op. So do you use crowdfunding platforms like Abundance, or do you do your own
Um,
share
we've
cash?
Yeah, we've never used Abundance because I think they might raise for some community energy organizations, but often it's been their own bond, and they've been very successful with bonds for councils, as I've seen for
Yeah.
a range of infrastructure. We've pretty much done our own share offers. I think we've used FX once, possibly twice, which is a great platform. But I think we've now got to the scale where we have a big database. We have members who are willing to invest again, so we can largely raise money ourselves without too much trouble. I think the last share offer, well, it was a bond offer we did 2 years ago, raised 700,000 in 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And you don't start up probably in any sector with no track record and no credibility being able to raise money that easily. But once you've done it a number of times, and particularly we've always delivered on our promises in terms of paying interest, paying it on time. We've always been able to pay 5% interest, and you kind of de-risk yourself as an organization from the investment perspective because you've proven it and you've proven your track record. So yeah, and there's I don't know if you know much about the community energy sector, but there's probably 300 plus community energy organisations
Yeah.
across the UK.
Well, perhaps
Um,
we could define community energy might be the next step. Uh,
yeah, it's a good question, and
where do you draw the where do you draw
yeah,
the
yeah,
limit?
where do you draw the boundaries?
Yeah.
And I went to Community Energy England conference a couple of 3, 4 weeks ago, and I missed the beginning because my train was delayed. But they'd had a debate for 15, 20 minutes about the definition of community energy. I thought, wow, a lot of us have been doing this for a decade plus, and we're still debating that. But I think fundamentally, it's about community owned. You know, so in our instance, we're a community benefit society, which is a legal model that was created probably the time of the co-op movement in the mid 19th century, and the structure has been updated to some degree, but fundamentally we exist to benefit the community.
Mm.
So for example, if we perform well or we have better financial performance in one year, we can't pay our members more interest. There's a defined cost of capital, and that has to,
Yeah.
uh, be stuck to. You can pay them less, but you can't pay them more. And any surplus we make has to be reinvested into our own operations, into new arrays, or into the wider community. And what we do is lots of education sessions in schools. So our community fund, it's basically about 3% of turnover,
Mm.
and we're hoping to almost grow that a percentage a year that we can dedicate of our turnover into the community fund. And we have about, I think it's about 50 education sessions, so classroom sessions a year, and we're growing that, and that touches maybe over 1,000 kids. And uh, we'll go back to the same schools each year because obviously kids go up through the age group, through the
Mm.
year group.
Yeah.
So effectively, we're I suppose using a commercial model to deliver community benefit. And other people in the community energy space might be doing energy efficiency work. A lot of retrofit, a lot of energy advice. We're primarily rooftop solar. We've done some EV charge points as well. And then there's other technologies. Further north, there's certainly community hydro. We don't
Yeah.
have, it's all about gravity and rainfall. We don't have, it's fairly flat around here and it's not very wet. So solar suits us much more than hydro. And obviously community wind as well, which has been a bit stop start because of incentives. But I think, since Labour's been in, they've removed some of the planning constraints.
Yeah.
Um, so broadly, it's people coming together to own local assets and the renewable assets or energy efficiency, and the benefits being distributed locally.
Yeah.
I think is the sort of
So
summary.
do you have a geographical limit? When you say Brighton is the greater Brighton area
Yeah.
that the
Uh,
energy projects have to sit within, or is it flexible in that level?
we've stuck to basically this side of the M25 and sort of Portsmouth over broadly Sussex and some into Kent and Surrey, just for practical perspective. An hour and a half drive or train journey is about as much as you want to do if you have to go somewhere quite regularly. And often, sites solar, as I'm sure you're aware, it isn't sort of a plug and play and forget. So, sometimes there's issues. You have to go do maintenance. We certainly have to go out once or twice a year to inspect sites, and we've got 60 different locations, all dotted around. The logistics of visiting those means if it was a couple hundred miles away, that would be a lot harder. I think we're open to further away if it was one or two big projects potentially. If there was an opportunity to invest in a solar farm, maybe uh, but then we'd get local maintenance contractors, and you wouldn't have to physically
Yeah.
visit. But there's also the question of treading on other people's toes because, as I said, there's 300-ish community energy organisations in the UK. Probably 50 plus have got significant assets in Sussex. Partly because of sort of slightly more progressive nature here, but also because it's a sunnier part of the country. There's quite a few,
Mm.
and we all collaborate as much as possible. There's occasional competitive nature. Sometimes we find we're bidding for similar projects, uh, but yeah, it's something that I like about working in this sector and perhaps in sort of social enterprise is the collaborative nature and the
Mm.
fact that we're geographically bound means I feel quite happy to do some sort of occasional mentoring or support others and share ideas because it's not diminishing our own opportunities.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Um,
win-win.
yeah.
So you mentioned bidding for projects, and that this is mainly rooftop solar. So my question
Mm,
was, whose
yeah.
rooftops are you installing the solar on, and what's your relationship with those bodies that are getting the solar?
Yeah. So we have just as it's materialized, actually, quite a diverse portfolio of rooftops. Lots of schools, got about 15 schools. We've got university buildings, we've got college buildings, we've got SMEs, no large corporates as such. And I think the first sites we dealt with were actually a couple of churches. We only did churches at the very beginning, it seemed. But a long-term partner is Shore and Port, who is just down the road from us. One of or two of their ex-directors are on our board. So we've there's a slightly permeable relationship where people have retired from Shore and Port, but they were the people we dealt with to do with renewable energy. They come and supported us. We've also worked with New Haven Port recently,
Mm.
and typically it's between a sort of 50. The sites we're doing now are between about 50 kilowatts to about 500 kilowatts. So sort of 50 kilowatts is maybe 300 square meters, and
Yeah.
that might be a secondary school roof. And then our largest array is actually 600 kilowatts, and that's on a vineyard
Oh.
because we've got quite a few vineyards around here. So a real mix of different types of organisation, and that wasn't necessarily done strategically. It was more a case of who will have us. So, uh, but when it came around to things like COVID, where lots of sites were closed down, that turned out to be an asset because we weren't, it wasn't all eggs in one type of basket.
Yeah.
So for a period of time, the schools might have been closed, where we had solar, so we were getting less revenue from them, but some of the businesses were working, and then that worked out. Um, Funnily enough, we were just interviewing this morning for a new salesperson, and talking to them about one of the biggest challenges we face is the longevity of lead times. You could be talking to an organisation, public sector or private sector, for at least a year. That's typical, but it could be 3 or 5 years. The initial contact, and it, I guess for them, it's never putting solar on your roof is never a terribly high priority. When electricity prices are high, it becomes more of a priority, but they've obviously got lots of core business challenges. But it is frustrating because the actual real work, as I term it, is about 2 weeks, 3 weeks, for a 100 kilowatt array to be installed by the professionals who do rooftop solar, 45 weeks of the year, and they know what they're doing. Obviously, we have to go through all the due diligence steps with potential sites and the sort of typical FAQ risks that they'll come up with, but we've dealt with all those in the past. And there's legal agreements, there's uh, grid connection agreements, but none of them are actually the critical path could be a lot shorter. Is my view. One site we dealt with actually was Maidstone Football Club, where the owner is a property developer. I think he owns a couple of rugby clubs in France, but he got it, and we were introduced by an installer that we were working with, who was I think they call the Gunners. I can't remember whether, but anyway, he was a lifelong fan. Introduced us to the owner of the club, and there was about 7 weeks until the feed-in tariff was going to drop, and we knew that we could offer you a really good rate if we could get it done in that time period. And I sat down with him and his you know partner in a law firm in Maidstone, and we worked through the lease in the morning, and then we did other things in the afternoon, and effectively we got it from first idea to installation in 6 weeks. And I kind of
Yeah.
always hold that up as, if there's motivation and you're dealing with a decision maker, it can happen a lot more quickly.
So
So
what's in it for the recipient? You know, if you're installed
yeah,
a school or a football club or a vineyard, what do they get out of it?
yeah. So basically, the core thing they'll get is cheaper renewable electricity. So the carbon saving, obviously, from on-site renewables. Alas, that's still not. I'm sure you find in your work not necessarily the high enough priority. It's generally the financial saving, which is important.
Yeah.
So we'll feature that attribute more, which is the financial saving, but the not that the carbon savings implicit, but
Yeah.
it's renewable. It's you're avoiding fossil fuels by installing the renewable energy, and generally, what they'll save is about largely we if a typical electricity bill was 25p, we might charge 15p. So you're looking at about 40% off your electricity bill for
Yeah.
all the electricity from the renewables, from the PV. Um, Obviously, it doesn't work at night, doesn't work so much in the winter, so it's smoothed out over time. But it's usually significant, few £1,000s to over £10,000, depending on the size of the site per year. That's the saving, but also we take away the sort of stress, the inconvenience, the lack of knowledge in a new technology. In that we'll manage the installers, we ensure, we maintain, we'll look after it for 20 years, and yeah, basically remove any of the headaches. If
Yeah.
a site were to choose to install the PV themselves, they'd get a better financial return, but it would be, their responsibility and a steep learning curve potentially. So
You're taking that. You're taking the 15p, but are you also then taking the excess that gets exported to the grid? Is that?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So simplistically, we model a site by looking at what PV could go on the roof. We understand what their usage is, and we estimate what could be generated and try and match the generation against the demand as much as possible. So, and then any electricity that's exported, we get paid for. Basically, we play around. Very spreadsheet driven, because anything like this, you got to get the finances right. We'll try and reduce the we call it power purchase agreement, the price we
Yeah.
charge for electricity, as much as possible, but still for us to meet all our financial hurdle rates, etc. So it's trying to be fair to both parties. Um, and for every site, we've built a model like that, which means aggregated together, you know, um, we're making a reasonable surplus to reinvest into further projects, reinvest into other community schemes or community benefit. And over time, that surplus builds up because we pay back capital each year,
Yeah.
so that the length of our projects lasts. The leases last 20 years, so each year we pay back 5% of capital, which means we have more surplus each year to reinvest. So once you get to that stage, it's quite a positive, almost sort of circular finance model of reinvesting in new assets. The real challenge is to get to that stage where you're making that sort of surplus and have enough assets.
So, in terms of obviously, there's other companies out there doing PPAs, doing rent a roof type agreements commercially. So, in terms of your pitch to them, are you just competing with directly with commercial organizations? Are you working on projects that they wouldn't touch for some reason? Or are you selling the community angle as sort of a social value stroke corporate social
Mm,
responsibility type added
probably
benefit?
all of those.
Yeah.
Yeah. In that we will definitely bid for projects, or we might initiate a project, go to a site, and then they might say, well, we've got an offer from somebody else who's, maybe it's the installer with an external funding scheme, um, which is competitive. And what's our USP? And
Yeah.
funnily enough, as I mentioned, we were talking this morning in job interviews about what our USP is. And largely, we are going to use similar technology. We're going to use similar installers, similar electricians, to a commercial funder. So you can't differentiate really with the technology, but what you can differentiate with is the benefit downstream. in terms of what we do with the money. So, a lot of the people will be talking to our parents. So we can talk about the educational value of school sessions we do, or we do small grants. We're mentoring other sustainable business, progressive businesses locally. So it's kind of the community value add,
Yeah.
which we hope differentiates all the local value add. And the fact that actually most of our investors are local people and that their employees or even them themselves could invest in the scheme. So, it's for some people that's going to appeal to them. Others, it's by the by. But
Yeah.
I suppose that's like any sort of business pitch that you've got to try and find a way of differentiating yourself. Um, you asked about smaller sites, and definitely we can do smaller potential sites than commercial operators might want to do because their cost of capital is cheaper. So
Yeah.
we're not looking at we'll pay our investors 5%. Our operational costs are quite low. We're making a decent surplus from other projects, so we don't have to be so extractive, which means we might make a project viable where others can't because of their cost of capital.
All right. That's very interesting. And you mentioned
Yeah.
before about other people having like one community wind turbine. Is there a scale that you sort of have to get to? Do you feel to make these things viable, or is it viable on sort of a single wind turbine, like some people seem to do?
Yeah, I don't think it needs necessarily. It relates to sort of the value of the asset, I suppose. So if you have one wind turbine worth a few million and it can generate, £20,000 to pay a part-time project manager, then you've got somebody who can then start working on the next project, etc.
Yeah.
It's just where you don't have the income to pay for people's time. There's lots of people in the community energy sector who work as volunteers, but you can't build business models on volunteers long term,
Yeah.
or it's challenging. So, a community that might own one wind turbine that's making a decent surplus that could then be reinvested into other people. We worked with Manor Royal, which is I think it's the second largest business park in the UK. So it's in Crawley,
Yeah.
and they have a business improvement district, and they were able to get I think it was £1 million of funding from the Towns Fund to invest in renewables at Manor Royal, which was a great leg up because basically they would be able to invest that money into PV on roofs and they wouldn't have to pay back capital and they wouldn't have to pay interest. So suddenly you've got at least £50,000 a year additional income that you can pay a project manager, and then you can do more and more and more. So
Yeah.
it's the classic startup valley of death thing. How do you
Yeah.
get through that stage?
Yeah.
We were lucky that we worked, unpaid to begin with. It was sort of frenetic days of the feed-in tariff, and we were able to sign up a lot of contracts that make a good margin. So harder for new starters, definitely.
Yeah. And then at the other end of the scale, is there a point you would get to where you would say, no, this is no longer you talk about Brighton and Sussex and now slightly
Yeah,
further afield. Is there a point where you'd say, no, this is enough for Brighton? If we wanted to sort of be in Bournemouth or somewhere further along the coast, would you say,
yeah,
no, this has to be a new project, a new body? Or can it
yeah.
scale indefinitely?
I no, I think we're focused on what's achievable and that there are others out there. Though we have looked into models where we might set up a site and then sell it on or pass it on to a new organization. So there's an organization we're talking to, a new community organization. There's an organization we're talking to that's got a big site in Coventry, and it would be the first time we might consider doing something so far away, but it would be a 1.5 megawatt rooftop array with high usage. So, it seems like a special case that would be worth setting up. But then that could create a lot of community benefit locally, which then might mean that some local people would set up a community energy organization, and then, we can transfer the shares over.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, broadly locally based, I think, but with sort of exceptions. And it also does come down to your own sort of stress and peace of mind. We don't want to be wide and deep at the same time and thinly spread. And we've got a model that works quite well in being able to scale from that. you know, it's quite helpful.
But it strikes me from talking to you that this isn't something that, sort of a half a dozen well-meaning people can do on their own. There's a huge business side to it, return on investment, sorting out the cash flow, negotiating the the installations and all the grid connections. This is all fairly complex commercial stuff.
Yeah,
It sounds if it requires a professional, even if it's a professional in a community body. Would that be fair?
yes, definitely. I think though your energy organisations that have grown the most have had to take that approach, and you have to because you're dealing with health and safety, you're dealing with people on roofs, you're dealing with electricity, which is a dangerous. I won't call it a substance, but it's something you have to take seriously. We have to comply with all the CDM regulations, building regulations, MCS regulations for solar installations. So yeah, it's definitely a sector that's got more professional. Um, there's a lot of support around as well. I should mention Community Energy Pathways, who are based in Lewis, who do a lot of training and support for new community energy organisations. There's an energy learning network. I think Ashton's behind that. We're involved with that, and I'm doing some mentoring for that organisation. And we do quite a lot of mentoring, both sort of paid professionally, but also ad hoc. Um, but yeah, it's definitely, referring back to what I was saying at the very beginning of thinking where I'd apply my sort of business and project management skills. It's made great use of those, um, because yeah, it's a whole range of skills: financial, technical, sales, etc. Yeah,
Yeah.
but with the aim of the rather than surplus income becoming a profit that goes to shareholders. Some of that does, but you create other benefit with what we deliver.
Yeah. And do you have any idea, how much of, obviously we've had this renewables boom in the UK. I was just musing that the first offshore wind farm was opened 25 years ago this month, and yet we've had this, and since we've had this massive boom in wind and in particular in solar. How much of that could be defined as community energy? Is it a couple of percent?
Yeah,
Is it tens of percents of
I think it's
electricity?
probably 2 or 3%, and it's certainly in Germany, which was one of the precursor countries for the feed-in tariff and community-owned assets, renewable energy. It's probably more like 5 to 10%.
Yeah.
That all links a bit more to, I suppose, it being more of a federal system, and they're having regional banks and local businesses having like municipal stakeholders. So there's more of a perhaps non-capitalist model. Maybe that's the way of describing it. I don't know. More social enterprise there. A good stretch for community energy might be 5% of renewables. Obviously,
Yeah.
the renewable installed base is going to be it's going to be expanding anyway. Yeah, and we'll do what we can, and we're always aiming to do a lot more. It's a bit frustrating that the government has lots of good intent, but not a lot of policy has sort of materialized yet. And I do recognise that's just the sort of parliamentary process that that has
Yeah.
to go through green papers, white papers, etc. Um, so, well, we'll wait and see.
Yeah. But is there a government policy on community energy, or just allowed to sort of fight it out with commercial bodies and
Yeah.
everybody else?
Uh, so there hasn't been anything in terms of feed-in tariff,
Yeah.
particularly. I don't think that's going to come back. There was talk of some grants funding through GB Energy or DESNZ, which has been put on hold, and I think it was all around uncertainty around the budget. Um, we're definitely seeing lots of supportive words, but supportive words don't pay the bills, do they? So,
Yeah. Well,
um,
I was just thinking of the withdrawal of Zipcar from the country.
yeah,
That the problem was that their cars were being treated by the system as any other cars, and they weren't
Right.
being given any dispensation on congestion charging or anything else.
Yeah.
So, despite the fact that they were part of the solution, so
Yeah.
I'm always intrigued by the whether a system that's set up for large providers has enough space for people like yourself to
Mm.
yourselves to bloom.
Yeah. Well, I think it does, and certainly the DNO. So ours is UK Power Networks. Who would be your DNO, your network operator?
Northern Power Grid.
Northern Power Grid, yeah. Have become much more collaborative. There's community energy leads. There's a lot of support. So the whole marketplace has evolved and it is
Yeah,
quite mature. What we are seeing is that there's some off-gem code changes coming through, which
yeah,
called P441 and P442. Don't need to know any more about that, but it will allow local energy trading, and
yeah,
that's imminent, and that would allow rather than having to have a hardwire connection between, we talk about some of the warehouses at Shore and Port, which have got massive roof space, but they don't have much electricity load. So there'd be not much point putting PV there. If you can do local energy trading using the grid and sell that to a local housing estate or a local school, then suddenly the economics of the PV will work, but the cost to the off taker, so the school or the housing estate, will be a lot less. So
yeah,
that could really unlock a lot more sites.
yeah. That's fascinating. So,
Yeah,
yeah, we've been chatting for quite a while, but
yeah.
what's next for you? What's coming over the horizon?
Right. Well, I'm 55 now and conscious that I might want to retire or slow down at 60.
Yeah,
Lots of people I talk to talk about, I want to work forever. I'm not sure that I actually do. I'd like to, there's only so many active years in life, and uh, one big thread of my life is outdoor sports. So I'm a qualified trek leader and ski guide and mountain biker, etc. And whilst, as you get older, you don't do at that sort of activity level, but I like to do, keep active in my 60s, but also I enjoy mentoring, and I think I'm going to train as a coach, and some business coaching, but also some personal development coaching, which um, links nature, personal development, and hill walking, wild swimming, etc. So running some retreats. So
yeah.
that's something that I've done in the past and would like to do more of. So yeah, bringing all those threads together, I think. Yeah,
Yeah, well, it's clear that you've been able to do that in the past, with
yeah.
your interest in business and then nature and clean energy and delivered what sounds like a fantastic amount of positive change in
Well, thank you.
the
Yeah,
Sussex area. So I think that just leaves me to thank you very much for coming on and talking to us about how community energy works
great.
and its scope to deliver on this important agenda.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for the opportunity. Good to
Brilliant.
speak to you.
Thanks.